Hello and welcome to this week's Property Matters, the show that brings global trends to an Irish audience to help shape your knowledge of the property market. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email us at hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your hosts for today are Bryan and myself, Carol Tallon.
Thank you, Carol. We have some intriguing guests coming up this week. But let's look at some of the big property stories of the past week. And first, the Irish Times published a Q&A feature with financial advisor Dominic Coyle, suggesting that there might be some leeway with mortgage lenders for couples where one partner has already had a mortgage to avail of first-time buyer rates. Also, commuters priced out of the capital are to be excluded from Dublin Affordable Housing Scheme. Workers with jobs based as far from the capital as Mullingar, Tullamore, Dundalk or Gorey could be eligible to buy discounted homes in Dublin, but under new affordable housing plans. However, those who have had to move outside of the capital and commute to the city to work are unlikely to secure homes in Dublin under the provisions of the new scheme. And finally, it's been reported by the Independent IE this week that the so-called cuckoo funds make more in Dublin than Los Angeles. US property giant Kennedy Wilson aims to more than double the number of apartments it controls in Dublin to 5,000. As a rent philosophy involved in the city. And the company has revealed the more than 2,000 apartments it currently manages in the capital are generating an average monthly rents of €2,049. Is significantly more than the apartments the group owns in and around the greater Los Angeles area. In Southern California, where Kennedy Wilson owns almost 3,000 apartments, the average monthly rent for its properties is €1,731.
And all we're missing is the weather. So in Forbes magazine earlier this week, there was a feature which asked the question, can a modern day rooming house solve the affordable housing crisis? Now, we've spoken a lot about co-living, so a startup Pad Split has created a business model that could encourage private investors to create affordable housing by making it more profitable. So it's a low-cost model of co-living, which obviously has been heavily criticised here in Ireland for the high cost, so it'll be interesting to watch this unfold. Also, a tiny Italian town in Sicily is selling homes for just €1. Yep, €1. Local government in southern Sicily is selling 100 abandoned properties online, and it's expected to have another 400 added soon. But of course, there is a catch. Buyers must agree to renovate their homes within a year of purchase, or they will lose their €5,000 security deposit. But still not bad for €1. Finally, HSBC research polled almost 12,000 adults over 21 years of age, and they noted a culture of property obsession across the globe, with adults spending an average of 3.5 hours per week trawling online listings, window shopping for homes and reading property magazines. Overall, the survey found that 6% of respondents were extreme house hunters, spending over 7 hours a week on property research. So that bodes well for our Property Matters radio show and podcast.
Well, now for government news, the news is that the government resumes tomorrow after its Easter recess. And something that is of interest to people in the property area is the Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill 2018, which is due to go through its final stages this week after amendments were inserted at committee stage. This, of course, is to amend the Residential Tenancies Act of 2004 to 2016. And believe it or not, there are 39 amendments to be discussed in the Dáil this week. Just to remind listeners, the idea of the bill is to legislatively underpin a number of objectives in the Rebuild Ireland review, as outlined in the government's strategy for the rental sector. Some of these objectives are already in situ, such as rent pressure zones, which provide rent predictability in areas of unsustainable rent inflation, provide more effective termination procedures for non-payment of rent, place restrictions on the use of sale as the reason for renting a tenancy. This is also known as the Tyrrellstown Amendment. Through engagement, encourage banks and landlord borrowers to agree sustainable solutions to buy-to-let arrears which result in properties being retained in the rental sector, and review how landlord obligations are addressed during receiverships of unencumbered buy-to-lets in order to ensure protection for tenants, and then to improve enforcement of the RTB determination orders, to encourage longer-term lettings by allowing unfurnished lettings, as in other jurisdictions, subject to the introduction of an appropriate standard minimum lease of 10 years. and move from 4 to 6 year tenancy cycles as a first steps towards tenancies of an indefinite duration. So in a nutshell, the intention of the bill is to give the Residential Tenancies Board some teeth to investigate its problems independently should there be unlawful rent increases in rent pressure zones, and have the power to create criminal offences for landlords who engage in non-compliance with rent increase restrictions in rent pressure zones. Landlords, of course, will have to be registered with the Rental Tenancies Board. And another thing is, it goes on to define short-term lettings. The most significant improvement is a definition of what constitutes a substantial change in the nature of accommodation provided under a tenancy. The current legislation allows for landlords to avoid rent increases restrictions in rent pressure zones. However, the proposed new definition says a change can only take place where at least 50% of the floor area of the dwelling undergoes renovation and the works are structural. So I just finish off by saying the definition for short-term letting means the letting of a house or part of a house for any period not exceeding 14 days and includes a licence, permits the licensee under the licence to enter and reside in the house or part thereof for such period. And I think that's really what's knocking Airbnb on the head as well. That's it for this week's.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. And look, I don't think that landlords are going to welcome more owners' obligations. In saying that, obviously we welcome the the industry is becoming more professional. That's what we need. Yeah. But I think it's interesting to see us moving to such long-term tenancies. So here to discuss this and more, we're joined by Sean Corbett, Sales Director of Mortgage 123. Sean, our resident mortgage guru, thank you so much for being with us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So, Sean, you might have heard just in the headlines there, we spoke about the Irish Times reporting that perhaps there might be some relief for couples who are purchasing who don't qualify for first-time buyer status because perhaps one of the two had a mortgage previously. Now, my understanding in the marketplace was always once either buyer had a mortgage previously or had owned or purchased property previously, then they didn't qualify as first-time buyers. But you're saying there might be some relief to that?
There is, but it's it still comes under an exception rule, whereby there are exceptions available, for instance, for people who are second-time buyers who want to onward purchase a new property and they haven't got enough equity in their existing property once they sell it to fulfil the 20% that is the normal deposit needed by the central bank rules. Mm-hmm. Now if one person has been on a mortgage before, yes, they are classified as a second time buyer, and then you'd have to go and get an exception, which is it takes you up to the 10% deposit only needed. So that is the way around it. The only other way around it would be to buy it without the other person on the mortgage. And there are two lenders in Ireland now who will do mortgage in single names. For instance, if one party wasn't earning anything, the other party was the main breadwinner and they were a first-time buyer, you could go to one of these lenders who will do just a single person out of a married couple.
Okay, but does that mean that only one name can go on the title deeds?
That's correct, yeah.
So that's a very vulnerable position for the non-income producing spouse to be in, or partner.
100%, and you need to get advice.
You'd have a higher interest rate then at that as well, would you?
Not at all. No, you see, the only difference these days between first-time buyers and second-time buyers is the amount of deposit. The rates predominantly, there aren't any special deals out there for first-time buyers anymore, apart from really it's a 10% deposit needed. But as I said, it does come under the exception rule, and the problem you've got with any exception now that you get from a bank is you can only have one exception. So if you're going for a loan to value, what I'd call a loan to value exception, i.e. you only need 10% deposit rather than 20%, you then can't have an exception on an income stretch, i.e. you couldn't get an income stretch then if you needed one.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, you can only have one exception. And with exceptions now, the market has tightened up hugely in the last 4 weeks, i.e. the criteria has become a lot more onerous.
Why?
In the last 4 weeks. So that's since you were in studio with us previously. Yeah. So you might just actually explain then for potential buyers, and of course it will impact sellers listening in, what those changes have been.
The changes are really they're favouring the higher earners, lenders are now. So for an example, if you need an exception of permanent TSB, you need a joint income of 70k or a single income of 40k. You then need to have to be able to show net disposable income of 150% of what they're looking for normally.
Good Lord.
So
that's quite a sizable number.
It is, and that's changed literally in the last week.
I mean, disposable income is so tight these times, isn't it?
It's very tight, especially when we spoke about it last time briefly. We spoke about if you have kids. For a good example, for Haven, who are part of AIB, every child they charge you €250 on a monthly basis.
But that's actually lower than a lot of the figures, because
it is.
I think the last time you were in, I mentioned to you that I think 400 per month was the lowest figure we'd seen, and actually we've seen places adding up to 1,200 per child. So depending on childcare arrangements and the age of the child or the number of children. So actually €250 per child doesn't seem like a huge excess then.
No, they're some of the better ones, and KBC are very forgiving for people having children. Ulster Bank are very harsh if you have children. So
that's interesting.
And the funniest stat of all is permanent TSB. If you have a child of 2, you'll suffer more than if the child is aged 3. So
why is that?
It's ages. They look at age groups, and even Finance Ireland, the new lender to the market, they go in different brackets up to 5 years, between 5 and 14 years, and then 14 years and over, and they penalise you separately for those age groups.
That's interesting. So is the reasoning behind this that it's supposed to be proportionate to the, I suppose, what the children cost? So, for example, childcare costs at an early stage are much higher than when the child maybe goes into school.
Well, they don't. Childcare costs are separate, believe it or not, because a lot of them now will ask you to declare child care costs. So if when we're talking to anybody, we have to ask them the cost of the child will come off automatically, either 250 to 400. If you then have child care costs on top, where they're going into a creche or a nursery or wherever they're going, you add that on to it, believe it or not. So it's not included in the normal deductions a lender takes off your net disposable income.
And is there any sense of nervousness out there at all in relation to how the economies nationally and internationally are going for these changes?
No. The statistics were that everybody was expecting lending to be 20% up on 2018 in 2019.
Okay.
That's been reduced to an increase of 4% in 2019.
Am I correct in saying, though, it's been up by about 9% in the first quarter?
It is, but it's there seem to be more properties. People are finding quicker. We find anyway. We do 50, 60 mortgages a month. And
this is down in Limerick now, is it? Yeah.
Well, we cover the whole of the country. Dublin, 50% of our mortgages are Dublin people. Right. And we're finding this year, people are finding a lot quicker.
Now, that's interesting. I wonder, are they finding it a lot quicker, or are they just they're so well researched and they're so well prepared that when the right property comes, they're primed to make a decision very quickly?
100%.
Yeah.
Everybody who'd leave us, for instance, would have an agreement in principle, so they know the money is available and they know their exact budget, and that's so important to have, because it's estate agents or auctioneers will take you serious once you've got an agreement in principle.
Oh yeah,
and that's actually, why people are finding.
Some agencies won't allow you actually bid on a property unless you have proof of funds or your approval in principle in place. So that's an interesting one. But one of the things I'm concerned about, though, approval in principles, how long are they lasting for at the moment? I know it depends on the banks, but
predominantly 6 months.
Okay, is it possible to get a 12-month approval in principle?
No, 6 months is as good as it gets, really.
Okay.
Now AIB, I believe, do a 12-month, but they're the only one. Okay. 6 months, and then once you find a property, then you have another 6 months to complete. So your mortgage offer would be valid then for another 6 months. And then if you're buying a new build property, you can get that mortgage offer extended up to 12 months because it's a new build, and you need time for the builder to finish the build. So you can actually.
What sort of environment now is there for approval in principle? I mean, is it steady, or is it increasing or decreasing?
It's steady. Our mortgage book is growing every month. We do 10 million approvals 10 million of approvals each month
10 million.
as a mortgage brokerage.
That's nationwide, obviously.
Yes, yeah, and the actual the approvals in principle, they're very different. People are getting very confused at the moment. They assume that if they earn 100k joint, that they can get 3.5 times that, and they will get approved for that. It's not. The biggest thing we're finding people are falling down on at the moment is proven repayment capacity. And that's where you can actually demonstrate that you've got the ability to service a loan due to your past performance, i.e. you're either saving enough, you're paying rent, so items like that. But people aren't getting it at the moment. The higher earners think that they can.
That's really surprising, because I would have thought with the rental crisis we're going through at the moment that people have been paying such high rents that actually I thought that was the one part of the mortgage application they'd be flying through. I mean, it makes it more difficult to save for a deposit, but you would imagine that they're paying very high rents that in many cases are going to be less than the cost of the mortgage.
No, and those applicants are predominantly fine because, for instance, Ulster Bank, you only need to prove 50% repayment capacity. With permanent TSB, you need to prove 80%, and with KBC, you have to prove 100%. So the rent is fine, but what we're finding is a lot of people are moving back in with mum and dad. They're paying cash to mum and dad to help with the monthly housing bills, and it's not going in their favour. And
so they don't have a record of rent paid.
Exactly.
So, but what is the advice to those?
The advice is there's a very, very short period of time that lenders look at. They look at 6-month history, and the advice is to get prepared. And even if somebody came to us today, for instance, who wasn't prepared and we couldn't help today, we actually give them a nudge as to what to do over the next 6 months. We'd then remind them after 2 months, how are you getting on with your savings, and we'd show them the budget they need to be able to demonstrate to get that mortgage. So 6 months goes very quickly.
Okay, and actually I think that makes sense. So in order to add value for any prospective buyers out there, because it's so discouraging when you hear young people who are currently stuck in rental saying, I don't think I'll ever be able to buy a house in Ireland. Can you actually, do you have a set of guidelines that you can say, okay, well look, if you want to successfully secure a mortgage in 6 months' time, this is what you need, and actually put them on the right track?
100%, and we do that a lot, and we find people do come back to us. We deal hugely with teachers, for instance, so they might not be on a permanent contract yet, but they can start that process. So they're going on a permanent contract in September, but this is what you need to do over the next 6 months before you hit September, so you can show that you're a good bet for the lender.
Okay.
Just wondering too, is there any reaction yet towards the news by the Minister for Finance passing down here that there is a growth revision downwards for next year? Any would that affect any of that sort of atmosphere within your business, do you think?
I don't think so, because there is the only softening I've seen is in the more expensive properties.
Right.
There is still a huge shortage of properties, like you covered off there, where there's big housing groups coming in and buying 2,000 apartments, and that's 2,000 apartments less in the marketplace and so on, and we're finding that there is still a huge shortage of properties.
Okay, Sean, before we let you go, just before we came into studio, you were telling me something very interesting, and it's no harm just before we let you go today, maybe to explain to our listeners about what's happening. You had a client who was sale agreed on a property for 162,000.
Correct.
What happened?
Well, it was sale agreed for about 3 months, if not longer. The client in question had paid their booking deposit. It was going through, even to the point where the lender had agreed to do the finance, and they had carried out a valuation on the property. Phoned the client to find out how she was getting on with her solicitor, and lo and behold, the lender, it was a repossessed property, but the lender had sold it on to a vulture fund or an investment fund for less than the money that the client was paying for it. So it was a huge sort of kick in the teeth for the client. She'd lost the property.
But also 3 months sitting waiting for it to close.
She's having to pay 192,000 now for a similar property.
To after sale agreeing something for 162.
Absolutely.
Do you know what the fund paid for that same property?
It was somewhere around 72 to 82,000 euros. So they paid less than she was actually paying. But it was part of a cluster of properties I expect that the fund was buying.
So they paid 80 to 90,000 less than the person who had paid a booking deposit and agreed to buy it. There's something wrong there, isn't it? Sean, we might take this up another day. Thank you so much for being with us today. Okay, that was Sean Corbett, Sales Director at Mortgage 123. Very informative as always, Sean. We look forward to the next time.
Perfect, thank you.
And stay tuned after the break. We're going to be hearing about an innovation in housing coming from Zoobox Ireland.
Broadcasting to South Dublin on 93.9. This is Dublin South FM.
Okay, and welcome back to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM with Brian Fox and myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. As mentioned before the break, our next guest in studio with us is Guillaume Pellerin. Apologies if the pronunciation is wrong there, Guillaume. So Guillaume is CEO of Zoobox Ireland, and thank you so much for joining us today. So
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, Zoobox is one of the most exciting innovations to come into Ireland, and I'm going to class it as part of the housing market because you are providing housing, albeit in an alternative style. So perhaps you might just explain what is Zoobox.
Yeah, that's always the question. What is Zoobox? So basically, Zoobox is, you can imagine it as a loft, a big open space, a 50 meter square loft that we place in an area of great natural beauty. So it's really made to be a vessel to bring people outside in the most comfortable way. So you'll have the same comfort that you would find in a hotel room. You'll have a king-size bed, a hot tub, actually a bathtub that can roll outside, a climbing wall, a fully equipped kitchen, shower, bathroom, everything. But we also try to give it a fun twist. So there is an hamster wheel that produces electricity. It's completely off the grid. There is a climbing wall inside, and
a climbing wall inside the building.
Yeah, inside the building. We're actually working on a new version with some other cool feature. We're trying to have fun with the design, but the master piece of this design is the wall. So we have a big glass wall that completely opens, so you really can sleep in your king-size bed outside. You have the feeling like you're really in nature. And
fabulous. And you've of course already delivered these, and you've delivered housing in Canada at this stage.
Yeah. So we started as a real estate company, really, doing eco houses in Canada. We were the first to do a LEED Platinum certified eco house in Canada.
We actually only have our first LEED Platinum building in
really?
Ireland down at
great.
Sir John Rogerson's Quay, literally by Hibernia Reet, only in the last few months that's been delivered to the market. So when did you deliver that in Canada?
It was 14 years ago. Like I don't want to brag about it, but it was 14 years ago.
But you're getting electricity off the grid.
Yeah.
The house produces its own electricity.
So
no, you produce the electricity. It's a hamster wheel.
Yeah, but actually the hamster wheel produces a tiny amount of electricity. And the idea is to show you just how much electricity you need in your normal life. So when you use the hamster wheel, you'll see a meter on the wall that shows you, what amount of electricity you're producing. But actually the real energy comes from solar panels and windmills. Because, even if you use the hamster wheel for 30 minutes or an hour, you'll only be able to power a small home cinema for maybe 30 minutes. So you realize that every day when you watch TV or use your computer, that just needs a huge amount of electricity. Right. It's interesting to just feel it.
Or boiling kettle of water for that matter as well. And tell me, just on this point, is it could you have a family house with this?
Yeah, well, it's made for holidays, so we're
made for
really
holidays,
marketing tourism here.
Right.
But they're made for 6 people. Usually we have groups of 4, so family of 4 or friends. A lot of our clients would be quite well, they're actually most of them would be millennials or retirees.
Oh, really? That's
so it's
one
funny.
end of the
Yeah,
spectrum to
because
the other.
we would have all those people that live in an urban setting, and they want to connect with nature, but they're not a generation that was familiar with camping. And so they kind of just like to go in a comfortable place and have fun with their friends and rediscover nature in a easy, setting.
So they'd buy a plot and put one of these houses.
We would do the development. So we would buy land, develop the houses with local partners actually. And the other part is our retirees. So a lot of them used to go camping when they were younger, and now they want to go back, but in a comfortable setting. So they get the same comfort as a hotel room, but they're outside.
And typically speaking, where would the settings be? Would it be by the beach, or would it be in some sort of well-resourced country area?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. We actually realize, especially in Ireland, that all the beach and the coast is highly protected for a good reason, I think.
Sure.
And it's the same thing in many countries. So we're trying to go a bit up in the mountain. That being said, we have an amazing site in Connemara that is looking at a fjord, but most of them would be a bit upper in the mountain because it's easier for planning. It's also easier to hide them, and we don't block the view from the
sun. With the little sunshine we get.
Yeah. Well, in Ireland, it's a different kind of landscape. You would have, especially in Connemara or Kerry with the mountains, you have this kind of ever-changing landscape with the clouds. So that's something that I think a lot of people in Ireland, we get used to it. But people from other countries, they just finding amazing to see that.
And how do you market these houses? Do you market directly to millennials and retirees?
Mainly online. A lot in Canada, because in Ireland we're just in planning phases on 5 sites. In Canada we've been running for a while. So mainly Instagram influencers, and that was surprising.
Influencers,
yeah,
really?
Because we went on Facebook for a while, and we realized, well, actually, our clients are on Instagram now. They're not really on Facebook anymore. So it's a lot of bloggers and Instagram stars, a bit of Snapchat too, but I would say mainly Instagram and the web. Yeah.
Guillaume, we might just talk a little bit about the business model, because you mentioned there that you develop with Irish partners. So you might just explain how that works?
Yeah. So basically, we're trying to find partners in a lot of places in the world, and we can, I cannot clone myself, so we needed to find somebody that's local, somebody that knows everybody in the area, and they're all most of the time rural areas, so it's important for us to partner up with local people. So we develop a 50-50 joint venture, and so we help push the cash down. They put a little bit of cash down, and then we finance the whole project. But it's not just the Zoobox themselves. It can be a welcoming center. It can be a parking lot with electric chargers for electric cars. It can be all the bikes you need for rental. It's just the whole ecotourism experience. And we also help them find their branding, because they all have different branding. And the idea is to create this network around the world of amazing natural landscape where you can travel and use all of them.
Yeah. For people listening in, how would they know if they're the right partner or a good fit for Zoobox?
Most of the time, I'm not sure I can tell them how they would know, but I can tell what when I know. And a good partner is somebody, obviously, that lives in what we call hotspots, so spots that are near an organic tourism market, but not in it. They would be just a bit beside it. Amazing views, so we're looking at world-class sceneries, mountains, sea view, something that
does that explain what brought you to Ireland?
That's
it's
right.
quite.
I was just trying to get. I was waiting for you to lead into that. We were going from Canada, very sunshine.
I get that question a lot too. And actually, Ireland was a really good market for us because there's 8 million international tourists in Ireland. And there was not a lot of offer in high-end glamping. And so we knew there was something there, and it was a good kind of test market for Europe and the world, but we didn't really plan to go abroad very fast. We thought we would just do Ireland, but because our model works with local partners and they can do a bit of the work because we're partnering 50-50, we're realizing that we have all those people calling us to start sites in other countries. So now the challenge is to manage them and to make it happen, because at some point you focus on so many things that you're not advancing fast enough. So we need to refocus now.
You have an interesting aspect to the business insofar as you're actually manufacturing or assembling these homes as well. So there's a lot of, I suppose, of your own technology and research gone into achieving these off-grid homes.
Yeah, so we've realized with the past, because we were a real estate company before, and we were using
in Canada,
and we were using subcontractors a lot of time, and we actually did an optimization study, a Kaizen study of a construction site. And we realized that your subcontractors can be really good, but if they don't communicate well together, you'll have a lot of delays and a lot of expenses. So we decided to go a little step forward, and we realized that most of the delays were with electric components and plumbing. The walls are pretty easy, and the finish is very long because you have a lot of different skills involved. So we designed what we call a mechanical block. So that's a block that would get any home off the grid, basically. So you have your batteries, you have your water treatment, you have your plumbing. So basically we would put everything you need for plumbing and electricity into one big block, and that reduced the cost of the unit for 25%. So we saw there was a major saving there, and we decided to push it a little further. And now we're realizing that, a lot of the construction is going to be made by us in a factory here in Dublin and then shipped abroad, because it's just a lot more effective, because they're so weird for subcontractors. They're not typical houses. They're glamping units.
But it's very much reflective of the marketplace moving from the traditional build towards a modular or prefabricated end product. So this is where it's interesting that you're coming into Dublin with your factory, because obviously that's not something that we've seen in Ireland over the past decade. So when do you hope that's going to kick off?
Well, we need to kick off soon because the orders are there. So we need to produce this summer. We had the first order for 15 houses for Canada, and it just doubled.
I actually read about that in the
Irish
Times.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. So you actually are exporting homes.
Yeah, we're exporting homes.
Brian,
now.
can you believe that we actually have people building homes in a factory in Dublin for export to the Canadian market?
Is Canada your only export market? Are there other markets
actually,
around?
there's a lot. We discovered national parks in Africa. Actually,
Is
it's a market we never thought about.
And how did it come to you, or did you?
Yeah, well, it's funny. We had contacts with the World Bank that's managing the Green Fund for Africa.
Okay.
And there's a lot of development in Africa to reduce the carbon footprint.
Sure, absolutely.
And ecotourism can be a great replacement for agricultural practices in some areas where they would burn a lot of fields to cultivate crop. And so the idea is to change those farmers that are burning fields into rangers for national parks. But there's not a lot of income in those national parks. And we are lucky enough in Canada that we have a national park system that auto-finances itself. So the national parks are offering lodging, they're offering activities, and they finance themselves up to 70%.
So they're more tourist centres
They're
as
a lot
opposed
more,
to...
but they also have a big protection culture and mission, but they're generating money, and we know that system well because we've worked with them. So we're trying to bring that idea to Africa with the Zoobox. So we would offer lodging with national parks and work with them towards a period of 25 years to train them and eventually give them the park.
So you have a Zoobox within a natural forest.
And actually
quite ironic.
In a jungle in Cameroon, and in a park in Madagascar.
Do you know what? I don't think it's ironic at all. I think it's exactly perfect because Zoobox Zoobox is the opposite to zoos as we know it. You know, the humans are in nature, but they're in the box.
Yeah.
And nature is all around. So actually, I think it's the perfect concept. But I'm fascinated by the business model side of it and the funding. So obviously, what you're talking about rolling out must have required a huge amount of funding and support.
It did,
so where are you in terms of investor confidence in the project?
So we got our first investors a year ago now, and now we're in production. The orders are good, so we will be looking for Series B funding, but in a year and a half. But so far we're good with funding. I just came back from San Francisco to meet with investors there, and there's a huge appeal in California for what we're doing. It's kind of a natural market for that. And so,
and do you raise your, if you don't mind me asking, do you raise your money publicly or privately?
Privately.
Yeah.
But so far, because in Ireland with our 5 sites, we're going to, of course, approach Fáilte and Tourism Ireland, because I think we can. A lot of their mission is to, presently, a lot of their goals is to redirect tourism from the traditional hotspots.
Yeah.
So, for example, the Cliff of Moher are a very good example where you just see buses and buses, and there's no real impact on the local.
They're not
in terms of staying there, and that's one of the downsides. Well, it's one of the downsides of our improved infrastructure that people can get from Dublin to the Cliffs of Moher and then back.
Yeah. So the idea would be to bring those international tourists, but just beside the cliff a bit further and stay there for 3 or 4 weeks,
which would actually benefit
the
local community.
And because we're building this network around Ireland of 5 sites, we can sell it to tour operators as tours. So usually international tourists will have 2 to 3 weeks to travel, so we can sell packages where you'll tour Ireland in those different sites, meeting local partners all the time, but you'll have the same quality of experience for every site.
Perfect. You have some quite high profile supporters and advisors on board at this stage. How did that come about?
It's perseverance, I guess. It's funny. We just got news that Gerald Lawless, the ex-CEO of Jumeirah Hotel, which is the big 5-star hotel chain that started in Dubai, that hotel that looks like a sail.
Yeah.
So Gerald was the CEO of this chain. He's also the chairman of the World Tourism Council. And now he's an official advisor for Zoobox.
So that's a huge vote of confidence.
Yeah, that's really, we're really happy to have him on the team.
Do you know, it's amazing for us to see an Irish startup that's truly global. And so that's why I think it's really important to point out that despite the French accent, you're very much an Irish startup. Like your team are based here between Galway and Dublin, and manufacturing out of a base in Dublin, I think it's something that we really need to see more of, particularly as we're talking about this shift from traditional construction. So what's next? What's next for Zoobox, apart from filling those orders?
That's already a big, So what's next is to help all our partners to raise funding in all their areas. So we're going to really focus on that. We have a team from Trinity that's going to do a team of MBAs that's going to look for a source of funding for all those people. And we're looking at launching a pilot project in all those countries just to get the ball rolling and start, because they're big projects. Like one project would be 4.5 million in investment, so obviously we cannot finance everything. But there are all those local fundings, and there's actually money to be made in ecotourism. And
I would imagine
a lot of people.
So it seems, as evidenced by.
Well, actually, for people listening in, who are sitting on land or in their rural homes around Ireland, which of course we do hope they're listening in, I suppose, first of all, where can they go for information?
On our website, www.zoobox.ie. It's simple.
Are you still open to meeting new local partners in the
Ireland,
most beautiful places in Ireland?
In Ireland, I would say we have a lot of demands, but if you truly have a world-class scenery, you can reach us and we'll see what we can do. Yeah.
Very good. Okay. That was Guillaume Pellerin, CEO of Zoobox. Thank you so much for being with us today, Guillaume. Please stay tuned after the break as we have a special interview with Aaron Block, co-author of Proptech 101, Turning Chaos into Cash, and that's coming all the way from New York.
Everything's fine on 93.9 Dublin South FM.
Okay, and welcome back to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM with Brian Fox and myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com.
On the line now is Aaron Block, who is co-author of a book called Proptech 101, Turning Chaos into Cash Through Real Estate Innovation, and he's co-author with Zach Aaron. Thanks for joining us, Aaron, on the programme this evening.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So tell us, from the residential sales agent to the greater contractor to the REIT executive, they're facing unparalleled threats and opportunities as far as you're concerned in the book. What are the threats, Aaron?
Well, certainly when we use the property in real estate terms, the phrase that comes to mind is functional obsolescence. And just the word obsolescence alone is very frightening to many property-minded folks. It's the idea that where you are today will be eliminated in the future. So I think as a practitioner, whether you're a multifamily, single-family to let or to sell agent, whether you're an executive of a large organization, or one of the people doing the work within a medium-sized organization, really across the entire org chart, it's really hard, Brian, to imagine that your job and your role will not exist a handful of years from now. And the reality is that obsolescence will come. Now, if you're an investment officer, even more particularly in the space, one of the threats is not just that your job won't exist, it's that the investment decision that you made, you were a fiduciary to invest money on behalf of some pensioners, in another country, or unions, retirees, that the investments you made are no longer viable and the value of them has disintegrated overnight. These are the fears, right, that folks have in the space today, and a lot of this is because of technology-driven innovation that's been bubbling up over the last few years.
Indeed, and you also go on to say in the book that business and real estate practitioners who ignore PropTech face three broad categories of threat: automation, disintermediation, I hope I pronounced that correctly, but more interestingly is functional obsolescence. You've just broached that topic. Would you like to expand on it a little bit more?
Yeah. So functional obsolescence is the best example we can come up with that's universally applicable is WeWork. And in Ireland we know WeWork, and across Europe we know WeWork, Asia we know WeWork, and certainly here in North America. I was sitting next to one of the chief investment officers of a large real estate asset manager a couple of years ago at one of the global conferences. And we started talking about how WeWork or co-working as a concept would affect the price of a building. And he looked at me and said he didn't know. So by putting a new use type, essentially a new service offering in a building, whether it's a portion of the building or all of the building, confuses the valuation of a building and allows the investors and the people who trade in these buildings to have a harder time coming up with a sustainable entry and exit point for their investments, which creates uncertainty, which creates opportunity. The idea that what you thought was an office building is now more of a hospitality play is really frightening, and as a specific example, something that has been occurring in front of our eyes. But it's not just that, Brian. These use types are a very good example of how functional obsolescence can creep in for the first time to many people's minds in property in our generation. You look at retail, which has been battered over the last few years quite a bit. Mm-hmm. We see retail turning, if you look at the malls, they're turning into experiential centers. We're also working on opportunities that bring hospitality and sleeping services into retail centers. We've got investments in technology companies that are bringing office co-working into dark restaurants. This blending of use type really is confounding the folks who had traditionally worked within a more static hierarchy or taxonomy of what real estate or property was. And that can really make your assumptions be thrown out the window and lead, if you make a big mistake, to obsolescence, to what you thought it was being no longer valuable in tomorrow's marketplace.
Yeah, so it's a complete mind shift, isn't it, really, from what we're used to in terms of real estate?
Sure. Yeah, it sure needs to be. It sure needs to be.
Now, the other fact I want to talk to you about too is that the fact that real estate have managed to insulate itself from technological advancements and innovation for longer than most industries. This only means that a pace of change is that much faster now, and you refer to it as the fourth industrial revolution. I take it you're talking about the technological revolution that's ongoing at the moment.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to expand on that in itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's easy enough to point at different industries that have evolved over the past few years. Of course, health technology is a big focus, particularly in the United States, where costs are so high. Advertising, media technologies. Many people, at least over here, are spending a lot of time cutting the cable cord and using YouTube TV or Netflix or Hulu as their primary source of consumption. Of course, many of us around the world are listening to Spotify on demand, and media technologies that didn't exist a few years ago. The jobs of record folks and the jobs of radio folks, frankly, I used to run a radio station myself, are very different today. So media tech is another example. Advertising tech, we're looking at fashion tech here in New York, fashion being a big industry here in Paris, for example. And then the closest cousin of the hyphen tech world would be financial services technology or fintech. And if you look at fintech, one great story that I like to tell, and that is oft repeated regardless of how truthful it is, and I believe it is, there was a time not so long ago that none of us used any technology really for our banking. We would go to a teller, we would endorse a check, cash a check, and then have our spending money. And then ATMs came along and slightly improved that. And today, very few people are visiting a bank branch or an ATM for any reason whatsoever. Everything's done digitally. You think of that, that's our lifetime.
Yeah,
that transition was in our lifetime.
Yeah. Let's going back to Proptech. You mentioned in your book that those who embrace Proptech will have the chance to realise efficiencies, save money, and add revenue streams. How will they add revenue streams?
Yeah, so some of the smarter enterprises and individuals who are engaging with Proptech are able to harness some of what's happening in order to get more rent if they own or manage buildings, which is frequently happening, or add a service offering that otherwise wouldn't be available. One example is we worked on a partnership between Cushman & Wakefield and a startup called Bowery Valuation. Cushman & Wakefield and many of the large brokerages had historically not done smaller multifamily appraisal and valuations. Bowery Valuations gave them technology through their partnership that allowed them to do that business effectively that they otherwise couldn't have. So that allowed them to pick up what is essentially a new service line, is one particular example. On the residential side, you see folks who are able to create more income through more efficiency, certainly, but also being able to generate new sources of leads that otherwise wouldn't have been available previously. If you look at Zillow in the United States, and there are analogs in other countries, being able to funnel leads to agents in a more effective manner than they would otherwise be able to do themselves, or just entirely new to them that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to access, has created new opportunities to make money for the folks who are most tech forward, who are embracing technology, harnessing it, piloting it, testing it, and incorporating it into their day-to-day lives.
Very good. You also say too that Trulia founder Pete Flint predicts that as a result of tech advances, most traditional real estate agents will be gone in a decade. That's a fairly tough proposition for traditional real estate agents to comprehend.
Bryan, if you go back to the financial services analogy that I was sharing with you, the other story from financial services that I think we can look to, in addition to there being very little reason to go to a bank branch now, if you look at Goldman Sachs, someone told me the other day that they only have 2 traders in the entire organization now. And in years past, I remember when I was in the real estate and property world, I was a broker, and all of these large banks were taking huge amounts of space for their trading floors, right? They had galas and oodles of traders running around on huge floor plates in Stamford and New York and London, across all major markets. Now they've eliminated all of that due to the digital transformation in their world, and now there are only 2 of them left. And those traders were very much, in many ways, intermediaries. You think of brokers, agents as intermediaries. I think most people say financial services is 5 to 7 years ahead of real estate in its technology innovation cycle. I think you can imagine Pete's being a little bit conservative by saying 10 years from now. I think it could even be sooner.
Really. And tell me, do you think then that are they up to speed? I mean, from the point of view of, I'm sure you're aware of the Irish market and the UK market, are the real estate agents ready for this transition? Are they familiar? Are they in the know about how quickly Proptech is adding to the business at the moment?
Yeah, I gotta say nobody's really ready, right? I mean, it's really hard to.
The same in the United States, would you say?
Yeah. I had a boss or a friend actually who once told me that when someone gets fired, even if they know it's coming, it's still a shock. And I think it's very much the same to an individual for their life's work and their career and their identity. It's very hard to come to grips with it. And I have to give a lot of credit to the folks who are in the UK, Ireland, Western Europe, Central Europe, and in some parts of Asia, really far ahead in their embracing and willingness to acknowledge the technological transition that's happening relative to the North American world.
Really? So there's less resistance here to it than in North America, would you would say?
Yes, sir, but there's also less innovation there, so it's a double-edged sword. People are more willing to embrace innovation, but there aren't as many innovators coming up with great technologies there due to the fact that the venture capital world and the infrastructure for entrepreneurship tends to be at least at greater scale on the coasts of the United States. So it's an interesting dynamic, and we're interested to see how it plays out over the next couple of years.
And tell me, what do you see as next? What's the next big development in this world that we're talking about at the moment?
Well, I got to tell you, over the last last year or so, we've had almost a unicorn minted a month in our space, meaning $1 billion U.S. Valued real estate technology Proptech company. I think what's in the future is a lot of investors actually getting capital returned from their investments in these companies, which creates this very virtuous cycle of new innovators wanting to get into the space because they're chasing the money and the glory of having made themselves and their investors a lot of money. So I think you're going to see a real scaling up. You're going to see much faster movement in the industry here to embracing change and innovation, especially in North America, which has been a half a step behind Europe historically. I also think there's going to be some really interesting areas of focus here beyond what we've heard over the last couple of years, which is kind of sensors and data and AI. I think you're going to see 3D printing taking a much bigger role. I think you're going to see modular construction starting to take a much bigger, more prominent role. I think you're going to start finally to see blockchain starting to make an impact. I think that's still probably one cycle away, but that's certainly coming. And one area that is very clear and dear to our hearts that we put our money where our mouth is around the affordability of housing. Any technology that's helping every city in the world or their particular city where they're based increase the affordability of housing or improve the affordability of housing is going to do very, very well. Those are some areas I'd keep my eye on.
And Aaron, if you could answer this in about 3 minutes, what if investors have got this whole thing wrong?
Repeat the question, Bryan. I'm sorry.
Sorry. What is going to happen? You've just mentioned investors putting money into all these developments, etc. What if they get it wrong? What if this thing doesn't work out as one hopes?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. So I've bet the entire farm, so to speak, on this wave not being wrong. So I believe firmly that the transformation is not wrong. I think there are a million ways to make poor investments. Just like as a property investor, there's a million things you can do wrong, both on buying too high, which is a risk in a rising market like we're in, as well as operating poorly, right? If you're not managing your property well, you could find many ways to fail. If you're not managing your tech investments well, you can find many ways to fail. So I don't think that it's so complicated or frightening. It's not like a child trying to rebuild a car engine, right? It's not that complicated. It doesn't have that many moving parts. The idea is you have to buy well, you have to back great entrepreneurs, and you've got to support them on their journey and be willing to take a few losses on your way to your win. So I think the real losers out of this will be the people who are throwing money around carelessly, who aren't thoughtful about how they're investing, with whom they're investing, and who aren't long on their positions. It's going to take time, but there's going to be mostly winners in this space for those who invest today.
So you're obviously very optimistic for the future.
Yes, sir, I am.
Aaron, very interesting. Thank you so much for coming on the line. That was Aaron Block, who is co-author of Proptech 101, Turning Chaos into Cash Through Real Estate Innovation, with Zach Aarons. Thanks so much indeed, Zach. Sorry, Aaron.
Yeah, my
Thank you
pleasure.
so much.
Thank you for having me. Cheers.
And that was Zach Aaron there, as you heard. Aaron Block, of a co-founder and managing partner of MetaProp, a VC PropTech fund. So that's it from us in the studio today. Thank you for joining us on Property Matters and the show where property matters. Get in touch with the show by emailing hello@iPropertyRadio.com or on Twitter @iPropertyRadio.
Okay, we want to thank all of our guests for being on the show with us today. Next week we have an in-depth data centre special, so we'll be joined by the Host in Ireland team with a number of experts in this area. But for now, thanks to Shane Flynn, who's on sound, producer Katie Tallon, and we're back at the same time next week. Stay tuned for Bowl of Soul, which is coming up next. So from Bryan Fox and myself, Carol Tallon, have a good week.